Gary Hustwit, welcome to the University of Huddersfield.
Thank you very much.
Filmmaker, documentary filmmaker, photographer.
Yep.
Interviewed, lots of famous designers. It's hard to mention names, but what were your highlights?
Well, there's like so many designers that I really admired before I started making the films, especially with Helvetica. I was a fan of graphic design and typography. I wasn't a professional designer, but I admired and had read about a lot of the designers in that film. So whether it was Massimo Vignelli or David Carson or Paula Scher or the people at Pentagram, so many different designers and firms who I'd either knowingly or unknowingly been exposed to for years and years and years. So getting a chance to meet them, I think, was one of the kind of driving factors behind making the documentary is getting to meet. It's you get an excuse to meet these people, and then the other films too. I mean, there's so many people that I've been lucky enough to meet and to talk with. So Jonathan Ive at Apple, or Mark Newson, or Dieter Rams, or Norman Foster, or Rem Koolhaas. I've done 70 interviews for the 3 films. So it was just it's a blur of really amazing conversations.
Yes, because I believe that you learn something new every day. From these people.
Sure.
Do you find the same thing?
Yeah, well, definitely. Well, most of the time, I'm not starting the film with any kind of preconceived structure or thesis. So I try to let the subjects that I'm talking to determine the flow of the film, or the narrative arc of the film. So it's really about what they want to talk about. Like, I've got questions and things that I'm interested in, but I try to just throw it back at them and say, well, what do you want to talk about? Like, what do you think is important? What do you think is not being talked about in this field? And then once you do enough of those conversations, you really get a kind of a picture of that field and what the kind of issues are, and that's how I kind of end up structuring the films. It's around that, because I'm not an expert in these fields. I'm interested, but I want to let the designers or architects or whoever I'm talking to, let them dictate what the film should be about, because they know much more about it than I do.
And the Design Trilogy, I mean, did it start as a trilogy, or did it start with Helvetica? You thought, right, well, fonts, that's where I want to start.
Yeah.
And did it go from there?
How
did it start?
There was no preconceived idea of making 3 films. I made Helvetica because I just really wanted to watch a movie about fonts, and when I looked around, there was nothing out there. So after obsessing about that for a few months, I said, you know what, I think I could do this, and just started sending emails to designers. So if there would have been a font movie already at that point that I could have gotten at my local video store, I probably wouldn't be a filmmaker. So I didn't have any thoughts after Helvetica in terms of making more movies until I had done it. And then once we had finished the film and toured it around, and I thought, well, there's probably other areas of design that we could kind of look at in the same way and kind of apply the same kind of rationale to. And then I've always been kind of a gadget geek and into kind of products and furniture and other kind of industrial design. So that seemed like a natural next direction. And again, there wasn't really a film about it out there. So I thought, well, why not? This is perfect. And then through doing that, the idea of this sort of 3 films kind of came about. I'd been interested in architecture, and I'd been traveling to so many different cities and kind of see what worked and what didn't. I thought that could make an interesting film, and no one had made it. So that ends up being a lot of my kind of creative process is, like films that I want to watch that just don't exist. I just wish they did, and I have to end up just making them to be able to watch them. If Times New Roman, the movie, was already out, then we wouldn't be having this conversation.
And at the end of, you've made your film, do you stand back and reflect on it? And what would your reflection be? Would you do it different?
I always wish that I could do things differently when I watch the movies, because they're always constrained somehow, either time or money or somebody else's schedule, or when we need to finish them to premiere at a festival or whatever it is. So there are always things that I wish we could do differently. The point that I'm most excited about the films is the day I have the idea for them. And after that, it's sort of like a slow spiral down of, well, like, I just want to watch that movie, but now to watch it, I'm going to have to spend 3 years, traveling all over the world, and I got to come up with the money, and it just seems like a lot of work. And the process is amazing, but the idea of the film that I have in my head when I when I first have the idea for it is invariably always better than the actual film that comes out. I don't know if that's fair or not, but the process is amazing. I've gotten to meet so many different people and travel and everything, but it's really hard to execute on an idea that's pretty kind of amorphous, and it's not a simple type of film. I mean, to try to make a film about the design of cities, it's impossible. So most of the films are sort of impossible from the get-go. Like, I know I'm going to fail. It's just a matter of, like, how much am I going to fail? So when I go back and look at them, I see all those little places that we had to compromise.
And how do you decide what to leave out? Because as a man who, photographer, you must see beauty in nearly everything. There's a fascination in everything. How do you decide, right, okay, well, I'm going to have to leave that bit out? That's
interesting. I mean, that's probably one of the reasons that we did the book, is because there's so much great stuff that we have to leave out that, got to a point. It has
to go somewhere.
Yeah, I was just really sad to think that all these conversations were going to rot on some hard drive, somewhere, all the things that we didn't use in the films. It's a really long process. I mean, the edit time that we take on making the movies is pretty much, we start editing almost from the, when we first start shooting. Because the movies are made in the edit room to try to chain these conversations together and figure out what the kind of visual analog should be, or the way they transition, or where the music goes, all these things. It's a lot of trial and error. It's a lot of watching and saying, oh, that's a good line. Well, that kind of relates to what this person said over here. What if we put that in? It's a lot of that. So the rough cut process is just grueling. It's a lot of watching things and kind of, it doesn't work, but then why doesn't it work? And trying to kind of figure out, what needs to happen, or who needs to come in or take something out, or whatever. But so it's all, the movies are made, I mean, documentaries are really made in the edit suite. And I'm not I didn't go to film school. I'm not like a film scholar or theorist or anything. So when I'm watching something and deciding whether it should stay or go, it's just a gut feeling. It's like is this interesting to me? I'm the target audience. Like, you can't worry about, we're not doing like focus groups about, who's going to be watching these films. I don't know who's going to be watching these films. There'll be a wide range of people in a wide range of circumstances. They might watch it on an iPhone. They might watch it on an 80-foot screen. Like, I can't control that. All I know is, do I want to watch this movie? Do I think this is interesting? And I just focus on that, and the rest of it just happens after it's done.
Tell me about the Olympic City.
That's a project that was started in 2008 by a photographer that I know, John Pack, who's an old friend and professional photographer. And he was just sort of fascinated by the Beijing Olympics, when all the talk was about all the money that had been spent and the bird's nest and all these kind of structures, and just sort of wondered, well, what happens, when the torch goes out? What happens after that? So he started shooting, he started going to former Olympic host cities like Montreal and Lake Placid in New York, things that were close to New York City. It's kind of like wanting to look, and shot some sort of exploratory photographs. And I happened to see them, a couple of years later when I was making Urbanized, and I was very much focused on, how what forces change cities, and kind of the idea of how these mega events, leave a mark on these places. So he showed me some of those early photographs, and I was like, John, these are amazing, and this is like a great project. You need to scale it up, and let's do more cities. And then I saw him, I don't know, 6 months later, and I'm like, have you done anything? And he's like, oh no, I've been busy. I'm like, I convinced him to let me collaborate on it with him. So I started photographing in different cities, and we sort of divided and conquered a lot. Hosting something like the Olympic Games just contributes so much to that city and the citizens sort of, I don't know. It's part of the cultural history. It's part of their identity. And when you go back and look at these spaces, 10, 20, 50 years later, I think it's fascinating to see how either the city has kind of organically kind of meshed with these places or it hasn't. So we've been looking at host cities around the world. Some of them, it's turned out really well. The games were an excuse to do things that the city needed to do anyway. And other times it's been a debacle because the city didn't need 20 new stadiums. A city like Athens just didn't need that. So of course that no one's going to need, if they didn't need it before the games, no one's going to use it after either. So, but a lot of times these countries and cities want to show that they can do it and show that they're an international city, and they'll, put themselves into debt to kind of put on a big party and a big show without a lot of thought into what happens after. Like obviously London did think about a lot of that stuff, but it's still having issues. It's a kind of fascinating way to look at urban design through the lens of kind of sports and all this stuff. So it's been a really fun project. We put out a book last year of the first 13 cities that we looked at, but it's ongoing, so we're continuing to photograph. Maybe another 5 years from now, we'll do another book. We're both very sort of committed to doing it on a long-term basis. So for the next 20, 30 years, we'll keep photographing and see what we come up with at the end.
The University of Huddersfield, inspiring tomorrow's professionals.